You're listening to part one of a conversation between former Aerosmith manager Keith Garde and Tamara Federici, producer of Every Band Ever, already in progress.
They're amazing. They're amazing.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
to watch Tyler and Perry work, to see Brad Whitford, who is truly an unsung, if not the unsung hero of what Aerosmith always was and is absolutely today. His skill, musicianship, genius. I once asked Joe early on, so dude, like, what would you be if you weren't a rock star? And he said, well, that's what I am. He said, that's who I try to be. That's who I am. I'm not, he said, when I need to learn something new, I ask Brad to teach me. Brad could make a living as a studio musician. He said, if I wasn't this, I'd be a half-deaf janitor.
I can see that. There's oh gosh, there's so many places I want to jump in at. But something that comes to mind is there's a Steven Tyler has a autobiography where at the beginning of it he says as a kid he was dragged away by animals into the woods. Have you heard that before? Like so, and then he said that that's actually like affected a lot of his outlook on thing is that he's really comfortable in the woods, but sort of his crazy life started in that way. And I feel like you can see that, but I wasn't, what do you make of that?
Oh well, look, Stephen is so marvelously, entertainingly, sometimes brilliantly, sometimes not so brilliant in his willingness to just be down, dirty, raw, and real. Um, yeah, Stephen, Stephen's parents had a resort in New Hampshire, Lake Sunapee, and so Stephen had a lot of time in the woods as a kid. His father was a classical pianist and a teacher, Victor, and lovely man. And so Stephen grew up, little boy, underneath the piano. So there's that. With Stephen's classically trained, and he's also a kid who got the shit kicked out of him all the time because he had skinny kid, loud, hyperactive, these big lips, this big mouth, and he Stephen Stephen caught a lot of shit. And until Stephen was a rock star, which happened for him in his teens, right where he began, um, he was an abused, bullied, beaten up kid who managed to find solace in those woods.
And how did you when you first saw Aerosmith and you saw that they were in gypsy outfits and looking like that their look, and I guess somebody from, what you're saying is so earnest and true, but your initial meeting of them might have been of like a bunch of like absurd rockers. Yeah, I don't know what was and coming from your kind of abstract expressionism and the AM New York radio, which is like a special. That's just as that sound was so special then, and it doesn't really exist anymore. Like at that, it's just really cool. I don't.
Yeah,
What?
and I was there when the likes of WNEW, when FM radio started to become a thing, and you would listen to the radio, and you could hear the DJ "Go," and now we'll listen to the B side.
I feel like you just encapsulated the '70s.
There we go. Right. And so, but when you're asking me about how that encounter, that's those first encounters with those guys dressed, great description. Um, remember, I'm a New York City kid, so I mean, you're
Right.
talking to a guy who used to
Mm.
go into CBGBs, exhausted from being up for days, being high and up for days, drop a black beauty, fall asleep, and wake up 20 minutes later like a fucking rocket. So, I was, I, I, I'm in recovery for close to 34 years, people would say to me, "Oh man, Aerosmith, you must have unbelievable stories, the orgies and um, all of my New York City party 70s stuff is pre-relationship with Aerosmith." Um, so when I met them, there was nothing about any of what they looked like or sounded like as humans, as artists. When I met them, they needed to get their career back.
Yeah, so did you steer the boat on kind of getting them to that point, or were they already starting to do that before
They were
you
so Tim Collins, who brought me in, and who I just want to make sure this is said, who saved my life, and maybe we'll get to that. But he also saved the band's lives and their careers. And so Tim had done the work, the job, the task, if you will, of getting the guys in Aerosmith, one at a time, into rehabilitative care. And so they were mostly, not all, but they were mostly through rehab and on a path of recovery. When I got involved, there were still a few to go.
hmm
The band did want their career back.
right? And that was so you were with them also during the '90s years. Were more like music video years or more? I was going to say stadium years, but that's
Yeah, well, not so much stadium, a little bit, but
I can't think of the word.
solid arena. I mean, um, and I got involved officially in July of 1987, and that was just just as before the release of their second Geffen Records album, Permanent Vacation.
I have something to reveal to you, which is that I also helped architect that career resurrection because I've produced all of these albums. So a lot of this is not news to me, but it's fascinating through how you experienced this and what you did. And I think we've crossed paths with Aerosmith, but I don't think we've ever been able to speak before. And I have never known what things are like from your side. I drop in and I work with the band and then I leave. So I have a very specific way of working. And I know that you've been with them for a long time. And the role of a manager is completely different than what I'm used to doing. Like when I've worked with the Beatles, I that's the closest sort of to heaven to me. And Aerosmith was a confusing band for me because early on they were really, uh, you know, lewd. They're really incredibly lewd and really difficult to pin down. And the gypsy thing threw me. And, I don't know if you were around for the Walk This Way
Run DMC.
collaboration. What's that?
No, so it's so sweet. People say to me, "Oh man, you were with Aerosmith in the mid '80s, and what was that year? 1986 when they did that." No, I wasn't. I came in right after.
I can tell you what happened I don't know if you know.
Well, I can tell you this. I would love to hear Tamara. I'd love to hear because I have heard from Stephen and Joe
Right?
their side of from the day that the idea was introduced to them by
Yeah.
Tim and Rick Rubin. And I've now heard from DMC, Daryl McDaniels, his side of that story. And interestingly, what I heard, I'd love to know, what your experience was that the bands, the artists on each side said, "Are you out of your fucking mind? It'll destroy our career to do this."
Yes. Yes, that's totally true. They're totally serious. Yeah.
And that Jam Master Jay said to Run and D, "Rick, when it comes to our career, Rick has never breathed a stupid breath in our lives. And if Rick thinks this is a good thing for us to do, we got to listen to him. and they all on both sides had an understanding. Again, this is the version I got, that if anybody objected to it, that it would never see the light of day.
Yes, that's true too. Right. And I mean, yes, Rick was really great, but who do you think Rick came to broker the deal originally? Right. So we spoke about it, and he was young and hungry, and he was the right guy to put those two people together because he was on the up and up, and other producers were not handling that well, or they just weren't as hungry and they got pushed out, and they should have, honestly. He's more both of their vibes, and they both wanted to walk away, and they were, like, I understand on the one hand where, sure, this is like a musical in a place where it was kind of genred in a way that is unnecessary. They were both sticking their necks out. But on the other hand, it's a musical collaboration. What's really there's not a lot at stake in that way, except they were both, bands that were successful, and at the time I just, they were handling it already, and I had done, difficult bands before. So this was, I let him handle it. He did a great job. He's done a great job since. He has a great sensibility. But it took a little while. I mean, I think what really came down to it was we took them all to a Red Lobster one night, and we kind of just had a roundtable discussion. We all ordered, lobster. We all got, an extra Sea Mariners basket back when they did that, and we just sat there, and we, nobody could leave until all the tartar sauce was gone, was the rule. And I always use that rule with bands. It's just like, we're not leaving until the tartar sauce is gone. And then it's usually resolved. So that's, and it makes sense. But at the end of the day, it was cool for all of them. And then there was an aerosols. Aerosols wanted to use, I don't know if you know this, this might have been during their time. But aerosols wanted to use Walk This Way, and they were actually both up for it. But they didn't like the way that the aerosols people walked, and so they thought it wasn't cool enough, not masculine enough, and they killed the deal because it was sort of a prancy. It was sort of a prancy.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was my experience, but yeah, I also want to hear your if you were there when they did don't want to miss a thing. Were you around for that song? That was during your time.
Um, I wasn't there for its creation or its recording.
I mean, I can tell you about that for sure.
Yeah. It's like, you can fill in my blanks, please.
All right. All right. This is, I guess I feel okay telling this story, like, years after the fact and stuff. I don't want to, you don't want to, you don't want to cross the band, but I feel like this is okay. That song was originally written for Celine Dion, right? And they took over the lyrics. But again, I did not use the Red Lobster tactic. I ended up being called into the back room of a place in Las Vegas, and Steven Tyler was sitting there with Celine Dion, and they were smoking hashish in between her sets. And they were also smoking it was amber, just straight amber, like ants are trapped in. It was the two of those things together. And then they really just decided that, Steven had missed some things, and she had said, but what if you don't miss the rest of the things? And she said, I think this song is for you. And then he said, I don't want to miss a thing. She said, that's it. You're in. And then from that, they did that song. I think they were already a Super Bowl band by that time. But yeah, so that was it. They just had the handoff. It was very simple. I just kind of nodded and left, and they handled it, and I walked out, and she did her second set. That was it. Did you hear something different?
Well, I never heard that story. So what I do know is that Steven had broken his knee. The bottom of the mic stand had hit his knee when he was swinging around, and that interrupted the band's tour. And they had an album that was out, 9 Lives, I believe it was, and they were on tour supporting that album, and so that tour got interrupted, which of course had an impact on ticket sales. Album was falling off the charts. Steven was almost fully healed, getting ready to come back out and for the start the tour again. And then Joey Kramer, we affectionately, jokingly say, tried to light a cigarette with his Ferrari. But Joey was in a fire in his car, and that further delayed, set the tour back. So now the band's album was failing. The ticket sales coming back were kind of shitty. And then Armageddon comes out. I Don't Want to Miss a Thing is released. It's because it's Aerosmith, it's on hard rock radio all over the country. Because it's a beautiful ballad, it's on top 40 radio all over the country. It's covered by a country artist at almost the same time. Now it's on country radio all over the country and becomes one of the most played songs ever simultaneously in the history of radio in America. Amazing. And
I know that.
ticket sales started to sell out. The tour records and catalogs started to sell. It was the Aerosmith's first #1 top 40 hit. We, kind of looking at the band, and I'm thinking, wow, it's like, are these guys the luckiest humans right now, or what? Right? And then, of course, they acquit themselves quite well when it comes to live performance. They are, yes, I have a bias, but whether you like Aerosmith or you don't, you want to see a great rock and roll live show, they are one of the great, great live rock bands.
It's so amazing how that they've had a 50-year career and that they keep, I don't know, there's really not a lot of bands like that, like the Rolling Stones, are they, I'm sure that
Although the original guys, and Brad Whitford once said, the 5 biggest fans of Aerosmith are those 5 guys in that band when they're playing live on stage. They notoriously argue, out each other, do all kinds of things, often quite publicly. But, to watch them play live, they were, they're playing now in Vegas. They're still out there. They're still
right?
right?
Right. I can't even imagine having to be that kind of a family is pretty intimate of what can you put up with for 80 years? I mean, from 50 years with anybody, you know what I mean? So that the fact that they actually figured out how to do that and that they're still doing it and that, I don't know, it's pretty amazing.
Keith Garde co-managed Aerosmith from the late 80s through 1995 and continues to consult for the group today. He has over 30 years of experience in recording/touring artist management and founded PK Management. His new CBD coffee line at rockincoffee.net. Tamara Federici was cryin when she met you, now she's trying to forget you. The producer and editor is Will Velasquez. The audio engineer is Clark Jackson. Executive producers are Carl W. Adams and Tamara Federici. Follow Every Band Ever on Instagram.